She told me I was being jealous when she sat on another guy's lap in front of everyone at a party. I realized that was my cue to leave, so I walked out and never looked back. Looking back now, I can see how the foundation of disrespect had been building for months, but at the time I thought we were just going through a rough patch that couples work through together. I met Iris during our final semester at Portland State University, and honestly, she was everything I thought I wanted in a partner. While I was the methodical engineering student who spent Friday nights reviewing structural calculations and planning weekend study sessions, she was the one who could walk into any room and instantly become the center of attention, drawing people to her with this magnetic energy that I found absolutely captivating. I was drawn to her confidence and social ease, qualities that felt like they could balance out my more reserved nature, and she seemed genuinely interested in my analytical mind and the way I approached problems with systematic precision. We started dating in February of our senior year, and I genuinely believed I had found someone who appreciated both my stability and my ambition, someone who could help me step outside my comfort zone while I provided the grounded foundation she claimed she needed in her life. After graduation, I landed a position as a structural engineer with a reputable firm downtown, starting at a solid salary that allowed me to rent a decent one-bedroom apartment in Portland's Pearl District, while Iris struggled to find stable work in interior design, sending out portfolios and attending interviews that seemed to lead nowhere productive. The job market in creative fields was notoriously competitive, and I watched her grow increasingly frustrated with rejection emails and missed opportunities. So when she suggested moving in together to split expenses, it seemed like a practical solution that would benefit both of us financially and emotionally. Without really discussing the financial arrangement explicitly, I naturally began covering most of our shared expenses, from the monthly rent to groceries to utilities, telling myself this was temporary support while she established her career, and she expressed gratitude that felt genuine at the time, often mentioning how much my stability meant to her during such an uncertain period. I calculated that I was spending roughly 70% of my take-home income on our combined living expenses, but I rationalized this as an investment in our future together, believing that once her career gained momentum, we would settle into a more balanced financial partnership. For nearly 8 months, our routine settled into something that felt comfortable and sustainable, with me working my structured 40-hour weeks while she freelanced on small residential projects and spent considerable time networking at design industry meetups, always coming home with stories about potential connections and future opportunities that might finally launch her career properly. I appreciated her drive and ambition, and I genuinely enjoyed hearing about her creative projects and the challenges of working with difficult clients, feeling proud that my steady income allowed her the freedom to be selective about the projects she accepted. When Iris finally secured a position at Meridian Design Studio, a boutique firm specializing in high-end residential and commercial spaces, I felt genuinely proud of her achievement and relieved that our financial dynamic might finally balance out into something more equitable and partnership-oriented. The job came with a modest salary but significant potential for advancement and commission-based bonuses, plus access to Portland's design community through the firm's established client relationships and industry connections, which Iris described as invaluable for building her professional reputation and expanding her creative portfolio. I celebrated with her by taking her to dinner at her favorite restaurant downtown, and she seemed genuinely excited about the opportunity to work with experienced designers and learn from established professionals in her field. Within her first month at Meridian, Iris began attending frequent networking mixers and client dinners, events that seemed to happen multiple times per week and often ran late into the evening, requiring her to dress professionally and maintain the kind of polished appearance that apparently mattered significantly in her industry. I understood that building professional relationships was crucial for career advancement, especially in creative fields where personal connections often led to major opportunities. So I supported these evening commitments even when they meant eating dinner alone or canceling our usual weekend plans. She started mentioning Blake Morrison regularly in her work stories, describing him as a confident senior designer who had been with the firm for several years and possessed this innovative approach to spatial design that impressed both clients and colleagues consistently. I noticed Blake appearing frequently in the background of her Instagram stories from these industry events, always impeccably dressed and seemingly at the center of whatever group conversation was happening, And while I felt a slight twinge of something I couldn't quite identify, I reminded myself that professional networking was essential in creative fields and tried to be supportive of her career development efforts. Blake seemed to represent everything that Iris found exciting about the design world, from his extensive portfolio of high-profile projects to his apparently effortless ability to connect with clients and secure major contracts. And I began noticing that her stories about work increasingly featured his insights and opinions rather than her own experiences and observations. I started hearing about Blake's weekend adventures and creative projects outside of work, stories that Iris would share with an enthusiasm that felt different from her usual professional updates, and I noticed she began adopting some of his design philosophies and creative approaches in ways that seemed to go beyond normal workplace mentorship. When I asked about her own projects and personal creative development, the conversations often circled back to what Blake had taught her or suggested she try, as if her professional identity was becoming increasingly intertwined with his influence and guidance. I told myself this was normal for someone starting their career in a competitive field, that having a senior mentor was valuable for professional growth, but I couldn't ignore the way her face lit up when she talked about his ideas or the increasing frequency with which his name appeared in our daily conversations. The dynamic started affecting our relationship in subtle ways that I initially attributed to her career stress and the demanding nature of her new position, but looking back, I can see how the seeds of what would eventually destroy us were already being planted during those early months at Meridian Design Studio. The changes in Iris's behavior started slowly, almost imperceptibly, beginning with our established Friday night tradition of ordering Thai food and watching movies together, something we had maintained consistently throughout our entire relationship as a way to reconnect after busy work weeks. She began canceling these plans at the last minute, claiming that unexpected client presentations or urgent project deadlines required her immediate attention, and while I understood that her career demanded flexibility and occasional overtime, the frequency of these cancellations increased to the point where our Friday nights together became the exception rather than the rule. I would find myself sitting alone in our apartment with takeout for two, watching movies by myself while she attended what she described as crucial networking events that could make or break her professional reputation, and when she finally came home well after midnight, she would be energized and talkative in ways that seemed to contradict the exhaustion I expected from someone working late on demanding projects. Her stories from these evening events always featured Blake prominently, describing his innovative presentation techniques, his ability to charm difficult clients, and his adventurous lifestyle that included rock climbing expeditions, art gallery openings, and exclusive industry parties that apparently happened throughout Portland on a weekly basis. I began to notice a pattern in her excitement levels when discussing Blake's latest creative ventures versus the more subdued tone she used when talking about our relationship or our shared future plans. And when I mentioned this observation, she quickly deflected by questioning why I seemed so insecure about her professional relationships and career advancement opportunities. The deflection technique became her standard response whenever I expressed concern about the amount of time she spent with Blake or the increasingly personal nature of their work interactions, and she developed this way of making me feel unreasonable for expecting basic communication about her schedule or questioning the necessity of attending yet another industry mixer on a night we had planned to spend together. She started staying out overnight for design conferences and team retreats that seemed to happen with unusual frequency, sometimes in nearby cities like Seattle or San Francisco, events that required extensive preparation and follow-up work that kept her occupied for days before and after the actual conferences. I supported these professional development opportunities because I genuinely wanted her career to succeed, but I couldn't ignore the fact that Blake always seemed to be involved in these conferences, either as a fellow attendee or as someone coordinating the firm's participation in industry events. When I asked about the specific benefits she was gaining from these conferences or how they related to her current projects, Iris would respond with vague descriptions about networking opportunities and industry trends, then quickly change the subject to criticize my lack of understanding about the creative fields and the importance of maintaining professional relationships that extended beyond traditional office hours. Her social media posts from these events began featuring Blake more prominently, with photos of them at upscale galleries, rooftop bars, and exclusive industry parties that looked more like social outings than professional networking opportunities, and while she maintained they were strictly work-related, the body language and casual intimacy in the photos suggested a level of comfort that extended beyond typical colleague interactions. I found myself analyzing these photos with the same attention to detail that I applied to structural engineering problems, noting the way Blake's hand rested on her lower back in group shots, the frequency with which they appeared together in candid moments, and the genuine happiness in her expression that I rarely saw in photos of us together anymore. When I mentioned my discomfort with these increasingly intimate professional relationships, Iris accused me of being controlling and possessive, claiming that my jealousy was rooted in my own lack of confidence and inability to understand the collaborative nature of creative work environments. She began comparing my reserved personality unfavorably to Blake's confident and outgoing approach to life, suggesting that my preference for quiet evenings at home and structured weekend plans reflected a limited worldview that was holding both of us back from experiencing the excitement and spontaneity that life had to offer. These comparisons became more frequent and more pointed, with Iris highlighting Blake's willingness to take creative risks, his extensive travel experiences, and his ability to connect with people from all walks of life as examples of qualities she found attractive and inspiring. I realized she was essentially telling me that I wasn't interesting enough, adventurous enough, or socially confident enough to meet her evolving standards for what she wanted in a partner, standards that seemed to be directly influenced by her growing admiration for Blake's lifestyle and personality. The emotional distance between us became increasingly obvious as she spent more time preparing for work events than planning activities with me, more energy discussing Blake's latest projects than asking about my engineering work, and more enthusiasm describing her nights out with colleagues than showing interest in our relationship or our shared living space that I was still almost entirely financially supporting. I began to feel like a stranger in my own apartment, watching Iris transform into someone I barely recognized, someone whose priorities had shifted so dramatically that our relationship felt like an afterthought rather than a partnership worth investing time and emotional energy into maintaining. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was funding the lifestyle and professional wardrobe that enabled her to attend these events where she was essentially replacing me with Blake in every way that mattered, from intellectual stimulation to emotional connection to shared experiences and future planning. When I tried to address these concerns directly, suggesting that we needed to have an honest conversation about the state of our relationship and the direction we were heading, Iris would respond with irritation and defensiveness, claiming that I was being dramatic and overthinking normal workplace dynamics that had nothing to do with our personal relationship. She began dismissing my legitimate concerns as evidence of my own insecurity and professional stagnation, suggesting that my inability to understand her career demands reflected poorly on my maturity and emotional intelligence rather than indicating any problems with her behavior or priorities. The gaslighting became a regular feature of our interactions, with Iris consistently framing my reasonable requests for communication and consideration as unreasonable demands that demonstrated my controlling tendencies and lack of support for her professional growth and personal development. I found myself questioning my own perceptions and wondering if I was indeed being overly sensitive about changes that might be normal for someone establishing themselves in a competitive creative field, but my engineering background had taught me to trust observable data over emotional manipulation, and the data clearly showed a relationship in decline. The final weeks before the party incident were marked by an almost complete breakdown in our communication and intimacy, with Iris treating our shared apartment like a hotel where she stored her belongings between work events and social obligations that increasingly excluded me from her life entirely. I realized that I had become financially and emotionally invisible to someone who was supposed to be my partner, reduced to a reliable source of rent money and utilities while she built a new identity that centered around Blake and the design community that he had introduced her to through his established professional network. The breaking point came at our mutual friend Sarah's housewarming party in a converted warehouse space in Southeast Portland, an event that I had been genuinely looking forward to as an opportunity for Iris and me to reconnect socially and enjoy each other's company in a relaxed environment away from the constant tension that had been building in our relationship. Sarah had put considerable effort into transforming the industrial space into something warm and inviting, with string lights hanging from exposed beams, comfortable seating areas arranged throughout the open floor plan, and a carefully curated playlist that created the perfect atmosphere for conversation and celebration among friends who hadn't gathered together in months. I arrived at the party feeling optimistic about the evening, hoping that being around mutual friends in a festive setting might remind Iris of the connection we used to share and provide a break from the work-related stress that seemed to dominate every aspect of her life recently. The first hour of the party proceeded normally, with Iris and me mingling together among friends, sharing updates about our respective careers, and engaging in the kind of light-hearted social interaction that I remembered from earlier in our relationship when we functioned as a genuine team. I felt hopeful that perhaps we were turning a corner, that the distance between us might have been temporary stress rather than a fundamental shift in her feelings and priorities, and I began to relax and enjoy myself in ways that had become increasingly rare during our recent months together. However, my optimism was short-lived, as Blake arrived fashionably late to the party, immediately commanding attention with his confident presence and effortless ability to insert himself into ongoing conversations, and I watched Iris's entire demeanor change the moment she noticed him enter the space. The transformation was subtle but unmistakable to someone who had been observing her behavior patterns for months, from the way she straightened her posture and adjusted her hair to the sudden brightness in her smile and the animated energy that replaced her previously relaxed mood, changes that clearly indicated his presence had become more important to her than mine. A group of party guests had organized an elaborate drinking game that involved various physical challenges and creative dares, the kind of silly party activity that normally would have been harmless fun among friends, but given the underlying tension in my relationship with Iris, I felt apprehensive about her participation, especially knowing that Blake would likely be involved. The game's structure included trivia questions about design and architecture, physical coordination challenges, and social dares that were designed to be entertaining rather than genuinely embarrassing, and most participants were treating it as light-hearted entertainment rather than serious competition, laughing at their own mistakes and celebrating others' successes in the spirit of friendly party games. When Iris volunteered to join the game, I initially felt supportive of her desire to engage socially with our friends, but I couldn't ignore the fact that Blake had positioned himself directly across from her in the circle, creating opportunities for sustained eye contact and interaction that felt more intimate than appropriate given our relationship status. The trivia round focused on contemporary design trends and architectural history, topics that Blake clearly excelled at given his professional experience, and I watched him help Iris with answers in ways that created opportunities for physical proximity and whispered conversations that excluded the rest of the group from their private interactions. When Iris lost a round involving specific details about mid-century modern furniture design, a topic that Blake had apparently taught her about during their workplace conversations, the penalty required her to sit on another player's lap for the duration of the next challenge, a dare that could have been completed with any of the dozen people participating in the game. Instead of choosing randomly or selecting another female friend, which would have been the obvious choice for someone in a committed relationship, Iris deliberately walked across the circle and positioned herself on Blake's lap, laughing as she wrapped her arms around his shoulders while he immediately pulled her closer against him in ways that went far beyond what the game required. I watched from across the room as other party guests exchanged uncomfortable glances, clearly recognizing the inappropriate nature of the interaction and the disrespect it showed toward me as her boyfriend, but Iris seemed completely oblivious to the social awkwardness she was creating or perhaps simply didn't care about the impact her behavior was having on our relationship. The physical intimacy between them was unmistakable, from the way she leaned into his chest to the casual manner in which his hands rested on her waist, and their comfortable familiarity suggested this level of physical contact was not new or surprising to either of them, indicating that their workplace relationship had clearly progressed far beyond professional mentorship. I felt a combination of humiliation, anger, and crystal-clear realization washing over me as I understood that I was witnessing the public confirmation of what I had suspected for weeks, that Iris had essentially replaced me with Blake in every meaningful way except for the financial support that I continued to provide. When the challenge ended and other participants expected her to return to a neutral position in the game, Iris remained on Blake's lap, continuing to laugh at his jokes and engage in intimate conversation while completely ignoring my presence across the room, behavior that demonstrated a level of disrespect that went beyond simple poor judgment or momentary lapse in consideration. I decided to approach them calmly and suggest that we step aside for a private conversation, hoping to address the situation without creating a dramatic scene that would embarrass everyone at the party. But as I walked toward them, Iris looked up at me with an expression of annoyance rather than embarrassment or regret about her behavior. Before I could even speak, she rolled her eyes in an exaggerated manner that was clearly intended for Blake's amusement as much as my humiliation and said loudly enough for nearby party guests to hear that I needed to stop being so jealous and possessive about her having fun with friends, as if her sitting intimately on another man's lap was perfectly normal behavior that only an unreasonable boyfriend would question. The public humiliation was complete and deliberate, designed to embarrass me in front of our mutual friends while simultaneously positioning herself as the victim of my supposedly unreasonable expectations, and I realized that this moment represented the final destruction of any respect or consideration she had ever felt for me as her partner. Blake appeared uncomfortable with the sudden relationship drama but made no effort to encourage Iris to behave more appropriately or to acknowledge that her actions were disrespectful to me, instead maintaining his position as the passive recipient of her attention while allowing me to appear as the villain for objecting to their obvious intimacy. I stood there for a moment, looking at Iris as she remained comfortably positioned on Blake's lap, her arms still around his shoulders, her expression defiant and unapologetic, and I understood with absolute clarity that this relationship was over and had probably been over for weeks without my full acknowledgement of the reality. The woman I had supported financially and emotionally for nearly 2 years had just publicly humiliated me at a party filled with our friends, choosing to prioritize another man's attention over basic respect for our relationship. And her complete lack of remorse or awareness about the inappropriateness of her behavior confirmed that she had already mentally ended our partnership even if she hadn't formally communicated that decision. I felt an unusual sense of calm settling over me as I realized that I no longer needed to try to salvage something that was clearly beyond repair, that I could stop analyzing her behavior and questioning my own perceptions because the evidence of her disrespect was now undeniably public and impossible to rationalize away. The months of gaslighting and manipulation suddenly became irrelevant because I finally had objective proof that my concerns had been completely justified, that my growing suspicions about her relationship with Blake were based on accurate observations rather than insecurity or jealousy, and that her accusations about my controlling behavior had been projection designed to deflect attention from her own inappropriate actions. I looked around the room and noticed that several of our friends were watching the situation with obvious discomfort, clearly understanding that they were witnessing relationship drama that had crossed the line from private disagreement into public disrespect, and I realized that continuing to engage with Iris in this setting would only create more embarrassment for everyone involved while accomplishing nothing productive. The weeks following my departure from the relationship were characterized by a sense of liberation that I hadn't fully anticipated, beginning with my temporary stay at my college roommate Marcus's spare bedroom while I searched for permanent housing that would represent a fresh start rather than simply another place to live. Marcus had always been skeptical of my relationship with Iris, though he had been diplomatic enough not to express his concerns directly until after I showed up at his door with my belongings and a brief explanation of what had transpired at the party, at which point he admitted that he had been wondering when I would finally recognize the obvious problems that had been developing for months. His support during this transition period was invaluable, not just for the practical assistance of having a place to stay, but for the perspective he provided as someone who had observed my relationship from the outside and could confirm that my decision to leave was not only justified but long overdue. I spent my first week of freedom focusing on the practical aspects of rebuilding my life independently, starting with the search for a studio apartment in a different neighborhood that would allow me to avoid the restaurants, coffee shops, and social venues where I might accidentally encounter Iris or be reminded of our shared history together. I found a perfect space in Northwest Portland, a clean and modern studio with large windows, hardwood floors, and enough space for a proper home office where I could work on personal engineering projects that I had been neglecting during the months when my attention was consumed by relationship stress and financial strain. The rental process was surprisingly straightforward when I only had to consider my own preferences and budget rather than negotiating compromises with someone whose priorities and financial contributions were minimal, and I was able to secure the apartment quickly and move in within 2 weeks of leaving our shared space. The financial relief was immediate and substantial, as my monthly expenses dropped by nearly 60% without having to subsidize Iris's lifestyle, rent, utilities, groceries, and entertainment costs that had been draining my savings and preventing me from building the kind of financial security that I valued as important for long-term stability and future planning. I calculated that I would be able to save over $1,500 per month while maintaining a higher standard of living than I had enjoyed while supporting 2 people on my single income, and I opened new investment accounts and increased my retirement contributions to take advantage of this improved financial situation. The emotional benefits were even more significant than the financial ones, as I rediscovered interests and friendships that I had somewhat neglected during my relationship, including weekend hiking trips with colleagues, photography classes at the community college, and regular social activities with friends who had been part of my life before I met Iris and who welcomed my return to their social circle without requiring explanations or taking sides in relationship drama. I threw myself into advancing my engineering career with renewed focus and energy, accepting challenging projects that required overtime hours and travel opportunities that I had previously declined because of relationship obligations and Iris's need for constant attention and validation. My supervisor noticed the improvement in my work quality and availability almost immediately, commenting on my increased initiative and willingness to take on complex assignments that demonstrated leadership potential and technical expertise beyond my current position level. Within 3 months of my breakup, I was offered a promotion to senior structural engineer with an $18,000 salary increase and additional benefits that included professional development funding and flexible work arrangements that would allow me to pursue advanced certifications and specialized training. The promotion represented validation of my professional abilities and dedication, but more importantly, it symbolized my return to investing time and energy in goals that actually mattered for my future rather than wasting resources on someone who had never appreciated or reciprocated my efforts to build something meaningful together. Meanwhile, through the inevitable gossip network that exists among mutual friends, I began hearing updates about Iris's situation that painted a picture of someone whose life was rapidly deteriorating without the stability and financial support that I had been providing throughout our relationship. The information came to me indirectly through Marcus and other friends who remained connected to our former social circle, and while I didn't actively seek out details about her circumstances, the reports were consistently concerning and seemed to validate my decision to remove myself from a situation that had been unhealthy for both of us. Blake's interest in Iris apparently lasted only a few weeks after the party incident, just long enough for him to realize that her financial instability and emotional neediness made her more trouble than she was worth for someone who was primarily interested in casual involvement rather than serious commitment. According to the reports I received, Blake began distancing himself from Iris professionally as well as personally once their brief romantic involvement ended, creating workplace tension that affected her performance and relationships with other colleagues who disapproved of the drama that had disrupted their previously harmonious team dynamic. Her design projects began suffering from the emotional turmoil and distraction caused by her personal life falling apart, resulting in missed deadlines, subpar work quality, and client complaints that threatened her job security and professional reputation within Portland's relatively small design community. The financial pressure became intense quickly, as Iris discovered that maintaining her lifestyle and apartment rent on her modest salary was impossible without the substantial contribution I had been making to our shared expenses, and she was forced to ask family members for loans and financial assistance that came with questions and judgment about her life choices that she found difficult to answer honestly. Her social media posts during this period reflected someone who was struggling to maintain the image of success and happiness that she had been projecting, with increasingly desperate attempts to portray her single life as exciting and fulfilling while the reality of her circumstances became more obviously problematic. I felt no satisfaction or vindication from learning about her difficulties, but rather a sense of confirmation that I had made the right decision to prioritize my own well-being and future over trying to rescue someone who had been taking advantage of my generosity and stability without offering anything meaningful in return for my investment and support. The contrast between our respective situations became more pronounced as time passed, with my life steadily improving in measurable ways while hers appeared to spiral downward from the consequences of her own choices and actions that had destroyed our relationship. I established new routines and friendships that reflected my actual interests and values, joining a hiking group through my engineering firm that organized weekend expeditions to Mount Hood and the Columbia River Gorge, activities that provided both physical exercise and social interaction with people who shared my appreciation for outdoor adventures and technical challenges. These friendships developed naturally around shared experiences and common interests rather than the superficial social networking that had characterized Iris's approach to relationships, and I found myself genuinely enjoying conversations about engineering projects, hiking trails, photography techniques, and future travel plans with people who valued authenticity over image management. My living space gradually transformed into a reflection of my personality and preferences, with quality furniture that I chose for functionality and comfort rather than appearance, technical books and professional journals that I actually read, and photography equipment for the hobby that I had been developing before I met Iris but had neglected during our relationship. The apartment became a sanctuary where I could pursue personal projects and professional development without having to consider someone else's needs or schedule, and I discovered that I genuinely enjoyed the peace and predictability of living alone after months of walking on eggshells around someone whose moods and priorities changed unpredictably. My career advancement continued at an accelerated pace as I became known within the firm as someone who was reliable, available for challenging assignments, and capable of producing high-quality work without the personal drama that sometimes affected other employees' professional performance. I began mentoring junior engineers and taking on project leadership responsibilities that positioned me for further promotions and increased earning potential, while also pursuing specialized certifications in seismic engineering that would expand my expertise and marketability within the field. The professional recognition felt particularly satisfying because it was based entirely on my individual merit and dedication rather than being complicated by relationship issues that had previously limited my ability to focus completely on career development. Meanwhile, the reports about Iris's declining situation continued to filter through our mutual friend network, painting an increasingly concerning picture of someone whose support systems were collapsing as rapidly as her professional and financial stability. Her job at Meridian Design Studio became tenuous as her performance declined and workplace relationships deteriorated following the Blake situation, and she was apparently struggling to maintain the professional image and client relationships that were essential for success in the competitive design industry. The financial strain intensified when she was forced to move out of our former apartment and into a much smaller and less desirable living situation that she could afford on her reduced income, a transition that represented a significant step backward in terms of lifestyle and social status that she had worked hard to achieve. Her attempts to maintain her social media presence and professional networking became increasingly desperate as she tried to project success while dealing with mounting bills, reduced work opportunities, and social isolation that resulted from her behavior and subsequent relationship drama that had alienated many of our former friends. The reconciliation attempts began approximately 6 weeks after my departure, starting with what I initially assumed were random text messages from unknown numbers until I realized that Iris had been creating new phone accounts and social media profiles specifically to circumvent the blocks I had put in place to prevent contact between us. The messages began subtly, with seemingly casual inquiries about my well-being and mentions of shared memories from happier times in our relationship, but quickly escalated into lengthy emotional appeals that combined apologies with explanations about her behavior at the party and promises that she had learned from her mistakes and wanted to rebuild our partnership on a healthier foundation. I deleted these messages without responding, recognizing them as manipulation tactics designed to re-establish communication that would inevitably lead to attempts to guilt me into reconsidering my decision. But the persistence and creativity of her outreach efforts demonstrated a level of desperation that I found both concerning and validating of my choice to maintain complete separation. When direct digital communication failed to generate the response she wanted, Iris escalated to showing up at my workplace during lunch hours, apparently having researched my daily schedule and routine to maximize the likelihood of encountering me in situations where social expectations might pressure me to engage in conversation rather than simply walking away. These workplace ambush attempts were particularly problematic because they created potential professional embarrassment and forced my colleagues to witness personal drama that had no place in a business environment, behavior that demonstrated either complete disregard for my professional reputation or a calculated attempt to pressure me through public discomfort. I informed building security about the unwanted visits and requested that they prevent Iris from entering the premises, a step that felt extreme but necessary given her apparent willingness to escalate her harassment campaign rather than accept my clearly communicated desire to end all contact permanently. The workplace incident stopped after security intervened, but Iris quickly shifted to targeting my apartment building, where she would wait in the parking garage or lobby hoping to intercept me when I returned home from work or social activities. Behavior that forced me to alter my daily routines and remain constantly vigilant about my personal safety and privacy. These encounters were brief and one-sided, as I consistently refused to engage in conversation beyond clearly stating that I did not want any contact with her and requesting that she respect my decision to move on with my life independently, but her persistence in creating these uncomfortable situations revealed someone who either could not or would not accept the finality of our breakup. When direct confrontation failed to achieve her goals, Iris enlisted her family members and close friends to contact me with guilt-inducing messages about abandoning someone during their darkest hour, claims that I was being unnecessarily cruel by refusing to provide emotional support during her time of crisis, and suggestions that my complete withdrawal from her life demonstrated a lack of compassion and maturity that reflected poorly on my character. Her mother called my work phone multiple times, leaving voicemails that described Iris as devastated and barely functioning without my stabilizing influence in her life, messages that attempted to position me as responsible for her emotional well-being and mental health rather than acknowledging that our relationship had ended due to her own choices and behavior. Her sister sent emails to my personal account detailing Iris's financial struggles and professional setbacks, implying that my departure had caused these problems rather than recognizing that they were natural consequences of her decision to prioritize Blake over our relationship and her subsequent inability to maintain the lifestyle that my income had been supporting. The family intervention campaign was clearly coordinated and strategic, with different relatives and friends reaching out at regular intervals to present various arguments for why I should reconsider my position, ranging from appeals to my sense of duty and loyalty to suggestions that true love required forgiveness and second chances even in the face of serious betrayal. I found these manipulation attempts particularly offensive because they demonstrated that Iris had portrayed our breakup to her support network in ways that minimized her responsibility for the relationship's failure while maximizing my apparent cruelty in refusing to tolerate disrespectful behavior, a narrative that conveniently ignored the months of gradual emotional withdrawal and ultimate public humiliation that had led to my decision to leave. Her best friends alternated between pleading her case with emotional appeals about how much she missed me and loved me, and criticizing my response as cold-hearted and vindictive, suggesting that refusing to answer her calls or meet with her for closure conversations demonstrated an inability to handle adult relationships with grace and maturity. These friends, who had witnessed firsthand the deterioration of our relationship and Iris's increasingly inappropriate behavior with Blake, were apparently willing to ignore obvious facts in order to support their friend's version of events, a loyalty that I found both admirable and frustrating given its disconnection from reality. The financial pressure on Iris became increasingly evident through these intermediary communications, as her representatives began mentioning specific monetary hardships that could allegedly be alleviated if I would consider resuming some form of financial support or at least meeting with her to discuss a gradual transition period that would help her stabilize her living situation. These suggestions revealed the underlying motive behind much of the reconciliation campaign, confirming my suspicion that Iris's primary concern was the loss of financial security rather than genuine regret about her treatment of me or authentic desire to rebuild our emotional connection on healthier terms. The most telling aspect of this extended harassment campaign was the complete absence of any acknowledgement of the specific behaviors that had led to our breakup, with all communications focusing on my alleged overreaction to normal social interactions rather than addressing the months of emotional neglect, financial exploitation, and ultimate public disrespect that had characterized the final phase of our relationship. Without her family and friends pressuring me to reconsider, Iris was apparently unwilling or unable to take personal responsibility for her actions or demonstrate any understanding of why her behavior had been unacceptable, instead preferring to position herself as the victim of my supposedly unreasonable expectations and harsh judgment. Her financial situation continued deteriorating during this period, as the combination of reduced work performance and workplace drama resulted in her losing the position at Meridian Design Studio, forcing her to move back to her parents' house and accept freelance projects that barely covered her student loan payments and basic living expenses. The loss of professional independence and adult lifestyle represented a significant step backward for someone who had been so focused on image and social status, and according to mutual friends, the reality of her circumstances was becoming increasingly difficult for her to rationalize or explain to her social media followers and professional contacts. Her parents, who had initially been supportive of her efforts to win me back, apparently grew frustrated with her inability to take responsibility for the situation or develop realistic plans for rebuilding her life independently, leading to household tension that made her temporary living arrangement even more stressful and unstable than her financial circumstances alone would suggest. The contrast between her current situation and the lifestyle she had been maintaining with my financial support became increasingly stark as she was forced to confront the reality of living within her actual means rather than the inflated budget that my income had been subsidizing throughout our relationship. Meanwhile, I maintained my policy of complete non-engagement with all reconciliation attempts, recognizing that any response whatsoever would be interpreted as encouragement and would likely intensify rather than discourage the harassment campaign, so I continued blocking new contact attempts while documenting the persistent violations of my clearly stated boundaries. My friends and family were supportive of my decision to maintain separation, particularly after I explained the specific circumstances that had led to the breakup and the escalating nature of Iris's attempts to re-establish contact despite my consistent refusal to engage in any form of communication. The professional and personal growth that I was experiencing during this period provided clear evidence that removing Iris from my life had been beneficial for my well-being, career advancement, and overall life satisfaction, making it easy to resist any momentary impulses to respond to her appeals or feel guilty about maintaining firm boundaries. My hiking group had become a source of genuine friendship and shared adventures, with weekend trips to Mount Adams, Crater Lake, and the Olympic Peninsula that provided both physical challenge and mental restoration, experiences that reminded me what healthy relationships and activities felt like when not complicated by manipulation and emotional drama. The photography hobby that I had been developing evolved into a serious passion project, with plans to create a portfolio focused on Pacific Northwest landscapes that might eventually lead to gallery exhibitions or freelance opportunities, creative pursuits that felt fulfilling and authentic in ways that my relationship with Iris had never supported or encouraged. My work performance continued to improve as I took on increasingly complex projects and leadership responsibilities, earning recognition from senior partners who began discussing long-term career advancement opportunities that could include project management roles and eventual partnership track positions within the firm. The financial freedom that came from supporting only myself allowed me to invest in professional development courses, high-quality photography equipment, and travel opportunities that enriched my life in measurable ways while building toward future goals that reflected my actual interests and values rather than compromises made for relationship harmony. During this period, I also began casually dating other people, not with the intention of immediately replacing Iris but as a way of reconnecting with social activities and romantic possibilities that didn't involve financial exploitation or emotional manipulation, experiences that reminded me what mutual respect and genuine compatibility felt like in relationships. These new social connections helped me recognize how unhealthy my relationship with Iris had become, as I contrasted the ease and enjoyment of spending time with emotionally stable and financially independent people against the constant stress and walking on eggshells feeling that had characterized my daily interactions with someone who viewed me primarily as a resource rather than a partner. The relief I felt about not having to monitor my spending, justify my career priorities, or manage someone else's emotional volatility was profound and ongoing, confirming daily that my decision to leave had been correct and necessary for my long-term happiness and professional success. As autumn approached, marking nearly 6 months since the breakup, the frequency of contact attempts from Iris and her representatives began to decrease, possibly indicating that she was finally accepting the permanence of my decision or perhaps simply running out of new approaches to try in her campaign to re-establish communication. However, I remained vigilant about maintaining my boundaries and prepared for potential escalation attempts, particularly around holidays or significant dates that might trigger renewed efforts to leverage nostalgia or guilt into reconciliation opportunities that I had no intention of entertaining. The final confrontation occurred 6 months after our breakup at our mutual friend David's engagement celebration at Willamette Valley Vineyards, an elegant venue overlooking the rolling hills south of Portland where the late afternoon sun cast everything in golden light that made the occasion feel magical and celebratory in exactly the way that significant life moments should be experienced. I had been looking forward to this event for weeks, not only because David and his fiancée Rachel were genuinely wonderful people who deserved to celebrate their happiness with friends who loved them, but also because I would be attending with Victoria Chin, a brilliant structural engineer I had met at a professional conference 3 months earlier who had quickly become someone important in my life in ways that felt natural and effortless. Victoria and I had connected immediately over our shared passion for innovative bridge design and sustainable construction techniques, but our relationship had developed into something much deeper as we discovered mutual interests in hiking, photography, and the kind of intellectual conversations that left both of us energized rather than drained by the interaction. She possessed the rare combination of technical expertise, emotional intelligence, and genuine kindness that made every conversation feel valuable and every shared experience feel meaningful, qualities that reminded me what healthy partnership actually looked like when both people contributed equally to the relationship's growth and success. We arrived at the vineyard in excellent spirits, dressed appropriately for the elegant but relaxed atmosphere, and immediately joined the group of David's engineering colleagues and college friends who had gathered near the outdoor bar area where servers were offering wine tastings and artisanal appetizers that perfectly matched the sophisticated yet welcoming tone of the celebration. I felt completely comfortable and confident in this social setting, no longer burdened by the anxiety and hypervigilance that had characterized my final months with Iris when every social gathering had felt like a potential minefield of inappropriate behavior and public embarrassment that could erupt without warning. Victoria fit seamlessly into conversations with my friends and colleagues, demonstrating the social ease and genuine interest in other people that comes naturally to someone who is secure in herself and comfortable with authentic interpersonal connections rather than performative social networking designed to advance personal agendas. The first 2 hours of the celebration proceeded perfectly, with heartfelt toasts from family members and close friends, a brief but moving speech from David about finding someone who shared his values and supported his dreams, and the kind of relaxed mingling that allows old friendships to reconnect while new relationships form organically around shared experiences and common interests. I was genuinely enjoying myself in ways that had become foreign during my relationship with Iris, appreciating the simple pleasure of attending a social event without having to monitor someone else's behavior or manage relationship drama that distracted from the celebration's actual purpose of honoring David and Rachel's commitment to building a life together. Victoria and I were discussing vineyard construction challenges with other attendees when I noticed a commotion near the entrance involving security and an increasingly animated conversation drawing attention from guests who turned to observe what appeared to be an access dispute. My stomach dropped as I recognized Iris's voice rising above the background noise of the celebration, her tone carrying the particular combination of desperation and indignation that I remembered from our worst arguments. And I realized that she had somehow learned about the engagement party and decided to attend despite having no legitimate reason to be there since David and Rachel had been primarily my friends rather than hers. She appeared disheveled and desperate, wearing a dress that seemed too formal for the vineyard setting, giving her an overall appearance of someone who had dressed up for an important occasion but lacked the confidence to execute the look successfully. Victoria noticed my sudden tension and followed my gaze toward the entrance disturbance, immediately understanding that this unexpected arrival was connected to my past relationship without requiring detailed explanation, and she moved slightly closer to me in a gesture of silent support that demonstrated her emotional intelligence and loyalty without creating additional drama. Iris spotted me within moments of gaining entry to the event space, and her face transformed from desperate determination to something that looked like vindication mixed with panic, as if she had been planning this encounter for weeks but hadn't fully considered what she would actually say or do once we were face to face. She began walking directly toward Victoria and me with the kind of focused intensity that suggested this confrontation was the primary reason she had come to the celebration, ignoring other guests who tried to greet her politely and brushing past waiters offering wine and appetizers as if nothing else at the event mattered beyond reaching me. The conversations around us gradually quieted as people recognized that some kind of personal drama was about to unfold in the middle of what had been a peaceful and joyful celebration, and I felt the familiar weight of being thrust into the center of unwanted attention due to Iris's inability to respect boundaries or consider how her actions affected other people's experiences. When she reached our group, Iris launched into a prepared speech about making terrible mistakes, learning important lessons about what really mattered, and recognizing that she had thrown away the best relationship she had ever had. Her words came rapidly and with increasing emotional intensity, as if she believed that speaking faster and with more passion would somehow make her arguments more convincing or make me more likely to respond positively to this public appeal for reconciliation. She declared that she had changed completely, that losing me had taught her to value stability over excitement, and that she was prepared to do whatever it took to rebuild our relationship on a foundation of mutual respect. The speech included specific promises about financial responsibility, career focus, and exclusive devotion that demonstrated she had been thinking carefully about what I might want to hear, but her delivery was so desperate and rehearsed that it felt manipulative rather than authentic, like a performance designed to generate sympathy from observers rather than genuine communication intended to address the real issues that had destroyed our relationship. I listened to her entire appeal without interruption, maintaining calm composure while she poured out months of accumulated desperation and regret. And when she finally paused to wait for my response, I looked directly at her and spoke clearly enough for nearby guests to hear that our chapter was permanently closed and that I wished her well in building a new life that didn't involve me. My response was firm but not cruel, acknowledging her emotional pain while making it absolutely clear that I had no interest in revisiting our failed relationship or providing her with false hope that reconciliation might be possible if she continued pursuing me. She stared at me for several seconds as if processing the finality of my words, then her composure completely shattered as she became increasingly hysterical, raising her voice to insist that I was making a terrible mistake and that Victoria could never understand or appreciate me the way she did. Her behavior quickly escalated to angry accusations, creating exactly the kind of public scene that had always characterized her approach to conflict. And security personnel approached our group and firmly requested that Iris leave immediately, explaining that she was disrupting a private celebration. As she was escorted toward the exit, still protesting loudly about the unfairness of the situation, Victoria slipped her hand into mine and suggested we get some fresh air, removing us from the aftermath while demonstrating her understanding that I needed a moment to process what had occurred. We spent the remainder of the evening enjoying David and Rachel's celebration exactly as planned, completely unburdened by the past drama.